When my plane touched down at Salt Lake City International Airport, I felt a stiffness in my chest that I didn't recognize. I had spent 2 years imagining what it would feel like to come home from my mission. The banners, the cheers, the hugs, the celebration of a job well done. People always talked about how powerful that moment was, how the spirit would rest on you with a sense of accomplishment. But when I stepped off the plane and saw my parents waving from behind the security barrier, I didn't feel the peaceful glow I was supposed to feel. I felt disconnected, like I was walking back into a version of my life I didn't know how to live anymore. My mom wrapped her arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe. She started crying immediately, the kind of soft, trembling cry that mothers save for weddings and missions and funerals. My dad clapped me on the back in that firm, proud way fathers in Utah do, like they're congratulating you for crossing the finish line of a marathon that everyone else expected you to run. But as they walked me toward the baggage claim, all I could think was that something inside me wasn't syncing with the moment. It was like returning to a movie set after they changed the script without telling you. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt right. The drive home to Bountiful was filled with small talk that felt heavier than silence. My mom insisted on hearing mission stories, miracles, powerful lessons, the spiritual highlights. She treated every sentence I said like scripture she could display on the mantle. My dad asked about baptisms and numbers, trying not to sound like he cared about the numbers, but obviously caring deeply. I answered everything the way a returned missionary is supposed to. I delivered the polished versions of stories I'd told dozens of times. The man who felt the spirit, the family who prayed together, the teenage girl who decided to come to church after months of lessons. But as I spoke, I heard a distance in my own voice. I was describing things that felt like they happened to someone else. When we pulled into the driveway, my younger siblings burst out of the house. They hugged me and asked if I'd brought souvenirs. They were loud and excited, but even their excitement felt strange to me, like I was watching a scene instead of participating in it. That first night home, after everyone went to bed, I sat on the edge of my mattress in the dark and tried to pray. I had done it hundreds of times on my mission, kneeling, hands folded, speaking into the quiet. But as I knelt, the silence felt heavier than it ever had. It wasn't the peaceful silence people talk about in testimony meetings. It was the kind of silence that makes you aware of every thought in your head and how little any of them feel spiritual. I stayed there for a long time, hoping to feel something familiar, something comforting, something confirming. Instead, I felt a distance I couldn't explain. It scared me more than I wanted to admit. The days that followed were full of expectations I didn't choose. Everyone wanted me to return to the rhythm, the pattern, the mold. Returned missionaries are expected to slide back into their old lives with smooth certainty, attend church with fresh devotion, go to institute, take callings, date with purpose. The path felt predetermined, like a conveyor belt pushing me toward temple marriage, kids, and an identity carved out long before I was old enough to choose it. At church, people grabbed my hands and told me I was glowing. Some said they could feel the spirit around me. Others told me they were excited to see me get sealed in the temple soon. One sister even joked, "We already have a few girls in mind for you." I smiled. I thanked them. Inside, I felt my stomach twist. The bishop asked me to speak my first Sunday back. I stood at the pulpit and looked at all the familiar faces waiting for a faith-promoting message. I opened my scriptures, read a verse, and tried to speak about obedience, sacrifice, missionary service, the things I'd been taught to repeat. But halfway through my talk, my mind drifted to a moment on my mission when we prayed with a man sitting on a broken porch. He listened, nodded, said all the right things. But when we left, Elder Grant said quietly, "I don't think he believed anything we taught." And for the first time as I stood at the pulpit, I wondered if I had believed everything I taught. That thought scared me so much I stumbled over my words. I finished the talk quickly and sat down, my palms sweating. My mom mouthed the word beautiful from the back row. My dad gave me a proud nod. I forced a smile, but all I felt was confusion. In the weeks that followed, I started noticing the cracks. Small ones at first. I couldn't get myself to read scriptures at night. The verses felt like words I had memorized too many times. I couldn't sit through sacrament meeting without feeling restless, like I was wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. I attended institute because I was expected to, not because I wanted to, and whenever people asked about my future, marriage, callings, career, my answers sounded rehearsed. One night I found myself lying awake at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, replaying moments from my mission I had been too busy to process. The hard days, the silent prayers, the lessons where I didn't feel anything, the pressure to testify even when I wasn't sure my testimony matched the words coming out of my mouth. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder whether the problem wasn't me, but the expectations placed on me. That subtle shift, that small internal permission, felt like a door cracking open in a dark room. It was frightening. It was also honest. That honesty felt like the faintest flicker of light, and I wasn't sure whether to follow it or shut the door completely. But deep down, I knew something. Ignoring it wouldn't make it disappear. And that was the beginning of everything that came after. The questions didn't hit me all at once. They came in small moments, the kind you barely notice until they add up and become impossible to ignore. It started with a journal I found in a box under my bed, a journal I had written during the first months of my mission. I flipped through the pages and found entries where I tried so hard to sound faithful and enthusiastic, even though I remembered feeling exhausted and uncertain most of those days. There was one entry where I wrote, "I prayed for an hour today. I didn't feel anything. I'll try again tomorrow." At the time, I wrote it believing the silence was my fault. I wasn't righteous enough, obedient enough, spiritual enough. But reading it years later after coming home, I felt something shift inside me. I realized that I had spent 2 years apologizing to myself for feelings that were honest. That night, after reading the journal, I opened my laptop. I don't even remember typing the words. I think my fingers acted before my mind could catch up. But suddenly I found myself reading about early church history, things I had never been told, stories I had never heard, contradictions I didn't know existed. I read them with a mix of fascination and guilt, like I was breaking a rule without meaning to. I stayed up until almost 4 in the morning. By the time the sun started to rise behind the mountains, the room felt different, like the air was heavier, thicker, aware of something I wasn't ready to accept. The next day, I felt sick. Not physically, but emotionally. I went to church because I didn't know what else to do. I sat in elders' quorum while the instructor taught about the blessings of unquestioning obedience. He said faith meant trusting without needing to know everything. He said doubt was a sign of spiritual weakness. I stared at the carpet the entire lesson, feeling the words soak into my mind like cold water. I felt small, like a child pretending to understand grown-up beliefs. After class, my dad pulled me aside. He had the same look he used when he caught my younger brother sneaking through the garage at midnight. "You've seemed distant lately," he said. "Your mother is worried. So am I." I could have told him right then. I could have said, "I'm struggling. I'm confused, I'm scared," but instead I said, "I'm fine." I had learned that answer years ago. It was the safest one. He nodded, though I could tell he didn't believe me. "You're the oldest," he said. "Your siblings look up to you. Make sure you're setting the right example." The right example. That phrase felt like a chain around my neck. I went home that night and sat on my bed, replaying his words. The right example meant certainty. It meant obedience. It meant pretending. I didn't want to pretend anymore. A week later, I went on a date with a girl named Sarah. She was sweet, confident, the kind of girl every Mormon mother hopes her son will marry. She talked about her mission plans, her temple goals, her future eternal family. She had a quiet certainty that I envied. At one point she asked, "Do you ever feel spiritually disconnected?" Her voice was soft, careful, like she was revealing something vulnerable. My heart leaped. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her everything, the silence, the doubts, the fear. But as soon as I opened my mouth, I saw something in her eyes. Not judgment, but expectation. She wanted reassurance. She wanted to feel safe. So I lied. Not really. She smiled with relief. Good. I want a husband who leads spiritually. That sentence hit me harder than anything else. Not because she meant anything wrong. She didn't. But because I suddenly realized that no matter how kind or good she was looking for someone I could no longer be. When I dropped her off at her house, she waved and thanked me for the evening. But as I drove away, I felt something inside me collapse a little. I knew I wasn't lost. I wasn't confused. I was just no longer the person everyone wanted me to be. Everything came to a head on a cold Sunday morning in March. The chapel felt too warm, the air too still. My skin prickled with discomfort as if my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. In Sunday school, the teacher talked about obedience again, how obedience brings blessings, how doubt destroys faith faster than anything else. At one point she said, "If you feel doubt, replace it immediately with faith. Doubt is the whisper of the adversary." I felt my heart pound. My throat tightened. Everyone around me nodded in agreement. Their faces peaceful, confident. I raised my hand. I still don't know why. Maybe I was tired of carrying everything alone. Maybe I was tired of pretending. Maybe I was hoping someone else felt the same way. What if doubt isn't always bad? I said. What if doubt is a sign that something doesn't make sense? The room froze. The teacher blinked at me, confused. A few people shifted uncomfortably. The silence felt heavier than any prayer I had ever said. After class, the bishop approached me. He rested a hand on my shoulder and said, "Let's be careful with those kinds of questions. They can take you places you don't want to go." I nodded, but inside something snapped. Not out of anger, out of clarity. I realized that the questions inside me weren't the enemy. The fear around them was. A few days later, I drove to the temple for a return missionary group session. I didn't want to go, but I didn't want to explain why. I parked early and sat in my car, staring at the glowing spire above the doors. People always talked about how peaceful the temple made them feel. But to me, it felt like standing in a place where everyone else had the key to a language I couldn't understand anymore. Then I saw someone walking toward me. It was Josh, Elder Grant from my mission. I rolled down the window and he leaned on the door, smiling. "Man, you look like death. You okay?" And for the first time, I didn't hide. The words came out before I could stop them. "I don't know what I believe anymore." He stared at me for a second, really stared, searching my face. Then he let out a long breath and said, "Same." That one word changed everything. We sat in my car for over an hour, 2 returned missionaries, both trained to be examples, both carrying doubts so heavy they felt like boulders. He told me he had been faking spiritual experiences for years because he thought something was wrong with him. He said he felt pressure to look perfect, be perfect, act perfect, when inside he felt empty. Hearing him speak was like hearing my own mind out loud. It was the first time I felt understood since coming home. That conversation didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the fear, but it cracked something open inside me that had been sealed shut for far too long. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone. And that small realization, just knowing someone else understood, changed the direction of my life in ways I didn't yet realize. Telling someone who understood was liberating, but it also made everything real in a way I hadn't prepared for. When doubts live only inside your head, you can pretend they're temporary, something that will pass with enough prayer, scripture reading, or fasting. But once the words leave your mouth, once they're out in the air, they take on weight. You can't shove them back into the shadows. You can't pretend they were never there. After talking to Josh, I drove home with the heater blasting, even though the cold wasn't the thing making me shiver. My mind raced with every possible scenario, of what would happen if I kept questioning, how my parents would react, what my siblings would think, whether my future as I had been taught to imagine it would crumble. But instead of panic, I felt a strange clarity, almost a calm. Like recognizing the truth of something you've been avoiding for too long. For the next few days, I lived in a kind of emotional twilight. I went through the motions of my routine, but everything felt different. Church felt heavier. Conversations with my family felt scripted. Even my bedroom felt too clean, too orderly, like a museum exhibit of the person I used to be. Then came the night I decided I couldn't keep hiding. It was a Tuesday evening, late, when I walked into the living room and saw my parents watching some BYU devotional rebroadcast. The blue glow of the TV lit up their faces, and for a moment, I felt like a child again, small, dependent, afraid of disappointing them. My mother's eyes were soft as she listened to the speaker talk about enduring faith. My father sat straight-backed, nodding, internalizing every word. I stood there for almost a minute before my dad noticed me and muted the TV. "Everything okay, son?" I opened my mouth and the truth rushed out before I could stop it. "I'm struggling with my faith." My mom's head snapped toward me. I saw her lips part, then tremble. My father's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in something like fear. I sat down on the opposite couch, my hands trembling, and tried to explain the unexplainable. "I don't feel the way I used to," I said. "Church doesn't make sense to me right now. I don't know what I believe. I'm trying, I really am, but I feel disconnected." My mom's eyes filled immediately. "You made covenants," she whispered, as if saying it quietly would make it less painful. "You promised God you would serve him." My dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low and steady. "This is the adversary confusing you. You came home with so much spiritual power. You can't let doubt take root." I shook my head. "It's not about sin. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm questioning. I'm being honest." "Honest," my dad repeated, his voice tightening. Honest would have been telling us sooner. Honest would be fighting these thoughts, not entertaining them. My mom reached for my hand, her fingers cold. "Baby, don't throw away blessings because of temporary confusion." Temporary confusion. Those words spiraled in my head. I wanted to scream that it wasn't temporary. It wasn't confusion. It was clarity, terrifying clarity that I didn't ask for, but couldn't unsee. But instead I said nothing. I let them speak. They quoted scriptures. They bore testimony. They pleaded with me to pray more, attend the temple more, fast more. Their voices layered over each other, but the words felt like echoes in a place inside me that had already changed. When I finally went to my room and closed the door, I collapsed onto the floor and cried silently into my hands. Not because I regretted telling them, but because I knew something important had broken. Not my relationship with them, but the illusion that I could navigate this without consequences. For the next several weeks, life at home turned into a quiet battlefield. Not loud, not explosive, just a constant pressure in the air, like oxygen had been replaced with expectation. My dad left Ensign magazines on my desk. My mom asked every night if I had prayed. My siblings watched me closer than before, unsure of what was happening but sensing something was wrong. I still attended church for a while, mostly to avoid arguments. But sitting in sacrament meeting felt like suffocating slowly. I watched families bow their heads together, watched people bear testimony with tears in their eyes, watched teenagers preparing talks about missions and temple marriage, and I felt like a ghost sitting among the living. One Sunday during fast and testimony meeting, a 12-year-old boy stood up and bore his testimony. His voice cracked as he said he knew beyond any doubt that the church was true, that the prophet spoke for God, that the Book of Mormon was perfect. His certainty hit me harder than any sermon, because I remembered being his age. I remembered feeling that same simple, unquestioning conviction, and I realized how much of my life had been shaped by that early certainty, how much of who I believed I was had been formed before I even understood the meaning of choice. After that meeting, I walked out of the chapel early and sat in my car, breathing like I had been underwater for too long. I didn't go back inside. I couldn't. I didn't officially decide to leave that day. It wasn't one moment, one argument, one revelation. It was more like erosion, a slow, constant wearing away of the ground beneath my feet. Every doubt, every question, every conversation with Josh, every late-night Google search, every Sunday where I felt like a stranger, it all added up until staying became harder than leaving. The first Sunday I skipped church completely felt like inhaling fresh air after months of stale rooms. I woke up early by habit, but instead of putting on a white shirt and tie, I put on hiking boots and drove toward the canyon. The morning was cool, the sun barely rising over the Wasatch Mountains. The silence I felt there felt nothing like the silence of prayer. It wasn't empty. It wasn't fearful. It was real. I walked until my legs burned and my lungs ached. I sat on a rock overlooking the valley and watched the sunlight spill over the neighborhood where I had grown up. For the first time since returning home, I didn't feel like I was failing. I felt like I was waking up. Over the next few months, I attended church less and less. I avoided questions from ward members who noticed my absence. I turned down dating invitations. I spent more time with Josh, talking honestly about the things we had never been allowed to express before. Those conversations became a kind of therapy, two people unlearning perfection together, discovering agency in ways we had never been taught. My parents didn't understand. They couldn't. They tried, sometimes gently, sometimes forcefully. They loved me. Of that, I never had any doubt. But their love came tangled with fear, expectation, and the belief that my eternal future depended on my obedience. Every conversation with them carried a weight I wasn't sure how to hold. But even with all the heaviness, something inside me was growing stronger. I didn't have answers yet. I didn't have a new identity. I didn't know where any of it would lead. But I was learning something important. Something about honesty, authenticity, and the quiet, steady courage of walking away from a path that was never truly mine. And that courage would soon be tested in a way I never expected. The real turning point came months later, at a family gathering I didn't want to attend. It was my cousin's farewell before he left for his mission to Brazil. My extended family filled the house. Uncles talking about stake callings, aunts praising modesty, grandparents whispering about who was falling away and who was enduring. I felt like an outsider the entire evening, like I was a living reminder of everything they feared for their own kids. My cousin, 19 and glowing with missionary excitement, pulled me aside. "I can't wait to feel what you felt on your mission," he said. "I want that same spiritual power." I opened my mouth to congratulate him, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I felt guilt rise in my chest. Thick, suffocating guilt. Not because I was leaving the church, but because I realized I could no longer pretend that my mission was what they wanted it to be. When he hugged me goodbye that night, telling me I was his example, something inside me cracked again, softly but deeply. I understood in that moment that if I kept pretending, if I kept playing the role they needed, I would be living a life made entirely for someone else. A few weeks later, I made the hardest decision of my life. I moved out. My parents didn't take it well. My mom stood in the driveway as I loaded a few boxes into my old car. Her eyes were red, her voice shaking. "You don't have to do this," she said. "We can help you get back on track." Back on track. The words hit me like a physical weight. To her, leaving wasn't choosing, it was losing. To her, I wasn't stepping forward, I was falling backward. My dad stood behind her, arms folded, face unreadable. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for," he said. It wasn't anger in his voice. It was disappointment, maybe even grief. I wanted to tell them I wasn't running away. I wanted to tell them I wasn't rejecting them. I wanted to say I still loved them, but I couldn't find the right words. So I hugged my mom, shook my dad's hand, and drove away with my entire body trembling. Moving into a small basement apartment with 2 roommates who barely went to church was the first time in my life I wasn't surrounded by religion. No scriptures on the nightstand, no temple pictures on the wall, no family prayer in the evenings, no quiet pressure in the air. The silence felt unfamiliar at first, but then it felt honest. I got a job at a warehouse in Salt Lake City, working early mornings that left my evenings free. For the first time since before my mission, I had hours of unstructured time, not dedicated to scripture reading, not dedicated to church callings, not dedicated to tasks assigned by someone else. Just time. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. Some nights I sat alone in my apartment and felt the weight of everything I had lost. The community, the predictability, the identity, the sense of spiritual certainty that used to anchor every thought and decision. Other nights I felt something entirely different, something that started quietly, like a soft hum in the background of my mind, a feeling of possibility, a feeling of rebuilding, a feeling of learning who I was without expectations shaping every thought. One night I went for a walk downtown. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, and the air carried that sharp autumn chill Utah gets before the first snow. I walked without direction, hands in my pockets, and found myself passing the conference center. I paused and looked up at its massive facade, so familiar, so tied to memories of certainty and belonging. For the first time, I didn't feel drawn to it. I didn't feel repelled by it either. I felt neutral, like looking at a chapter of my life that had ended without bitterness. I continued walking until I reached a small cafe still open late. I ordered hot chocolate and sat near the window watching people pass by, couples holding hands, groups laughing, someone crying into their phone. For the first time in a long time, I felt connected to something bigger than doctrine or culture, something human, something real. It struck me then how much of my life had been spent trying to fit into a predetermined framework, the right beliefs, the right behaviors, the right future. But here, in this small moment, I felt something shift inside me. A quiet understanding that life wasn't supposed to be about fitting into boxes. It was about learning who you become when the boxes fall away. Over the next months, I rebuilt myself slowly, piece by piece, choice by choice. I started reading books that weren't approved by church culture. I went to therapy for the first time in my life. I learned to sit with discomfort without labeling it as sin. I found friendships that weren't built on shared beliefs but on shared honesty. And slowly, the world began to feel less frightening. One day I got a message from my little brother. It said, "I miss you. Can I come see your new place?" I stared at the text for a long time, overwhelmed by something I couldn't name. Maybe hope, maybe healing, maybe the understanding that relationships don't need identical beliefs to survive. They need honesty, compassion, and space. When he came over, he looked around my small apartment and smiled awkwardly. Then he said, "Mom and Dad are still upset, but I don't care. You're still my brother." I swallowed hard as he hugged me. That moment meant more to me than any testimony meeting I had ever sat through. Months passed, and the pain softened. Not because the past stopped mattering, but because I no longer let it define me. I learned to accept each moment as part of a larger rhythm, the kind that shapes you without forcing you, the kind that pulls you toward honesty, away from fear. And that's when I realized something profound, a realization that didn't come in a flash of revelation, but gradually, through every quiet choice I made. Life responds to what you embrace, not what you avoid. The world mirrors the state of your inner self. Every step forward creates a corresponding shift around you, and when your thoughts align with your truth, your life begins to align with it too. I wasn't lost, I wasn't broken, I wasn't misguided. I was transforming. Not away from something, but into something. Leaving the church didn't destroy my life. It gave me back the ability to choose it. And if you're watching this right now, listening to my story, I want you to know something. You're not alone. Whatever you feel, fear, confusion, relief, grief, it's valid. You deserve honesty. You deserve peace. You deserve a life that feels like yours. If this story helped you in any way, feel free to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Stories only matter when they help someone else find their own voice. And if you feel inclined to support more stories like this, the Buy Me a Coffee link is in the description and pinned comment. This is my story, not the one I was handed, the one I chose.